Now that we've talked about child routes, let's talk about route params. And so this is a fairly familiar concept, especially if you've done anything with like a RESTful web service or a RESTful API, is that you have a collection, which then you can hit, from like courses or lessons. And so you kind of have that plural portion of the URL, and then /, and then you have some ID that says, within this collection, I want to get this single thing. And so the question is, how do we get route params in Angular? How does that work? And so we have a route params example that we're going to build out. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hop inside of our app routing module, and we're going to add in a new route. So just underneath the child routes here, we are going to add in actually 2 routes. And so the first one is going to be a params route. So path, params, and the component is going to be the route params component. And we're going to just duplicate this, and we're going to target the same component, but what we want is the ability to navigate to this route, but then pass in an ID and then act upon that. So we're going to go params, and you denote a route param using : whatever you want to call that param. So if, for instance, I call this foobar, when I am pulling in the route params map, that this is what this would come across as. So it's important to use something that is descriptive and is going to make sense once you get into the loaded component. One other thing that I want to point out here is that route order matters. And so Angular is going to go from the top to the bottom, and as soon as it matches a route, it's going to go to that. And so if you mess this up, or if you actually have like something that is eagerly loaded before it gets to something that you really want to go to, you can be like, how come I can't get to this route? It's because your route order is not entirely correct. So with that, let's hop into our route params component. And what we have here is an array of lessons that every one of the lessons has an ID. So if we go into the application here, what we have is we're loading the lessons, and I want to be able to click on this and be able to see the lesson over here. So back into our code, we need to import a couple services to make this work. So the first service that we are going to inject as a dependency is going to be activated route. And we'll actually just call this route. And this is activated route. There we go. And the second one is going to be router. Okay, let me just make sure that I have these imported in correctly. Yep. All right. Now, within Angiana init, what we're going to do is we are going to listen for the route. And so what's neat about this is this param map is an observable. And so if the param is changing and you're just only catching it one time, so for instance, I was saying param equals, and I pulled it just right off of it, that there would be no mechanism to update the component to say, hey, this is a new route. And so this is the beauty of reactive frameworks, observables, etc. So param map is an observable stream. so that as it changes, that it notifies the underlying component that, hey, this thing changed, you need to update yourself. And so from here, we're going to receive a params object, and I'm going to break to a new line, and we're going to grab the current ID. So from here, params get, and so this is just a getter, and we're going to grab the ID off of the params object that's being passed via the param map observable stream. And if this exists, then we're going to set our current lesson to the, or rather, I can just call this directly. So this dot set current lesson, and we're going to pass in this current ID. And so now all this is doing is when we navigate and we have an ID in the URL, it's going to capture that, and then it's going to call set current lesson, which then sets the current lesson. So if we go here, let's just refresh so it's clean. And if I go / and we go like 1, you'll see now that it's loading this particular lesson. Or let's go maybe with like 5. You can see here now that it's pulling that in, grabbing it, and setting the current lesson. And if we wanted to navigate to this, well, it's going to look very similar to how we would navigate to a child route. And so now if we jump back into the code, we can go inside of the route params HTML or the template. So let me just open this, and let's wire this up so we can navigate to a specific route with a route param. And so on this list item here, I'm going to add in a router link, and then we're going to add in an array because we need to essentially composite a new URL. And we'll go examples, params, and so this is kind of the base portion of it. And then from here, what we want to do is we want to add in lesson ID to this route. So we'll save that, and then we'll go back into our code, refresh this, and I'll just go to the base here. And then if I click on this, you'll see now that we are incrementing, or whatever ID that is attached to this lesson is being added to the URL, and we're loading it over here. So this is really, really handy when you want to send somebody to a specific item within a collection. So for instance, just for thought, is that if you wanted to load this master detail view with a specific course already selected, this is where this technique would come in. So, you could say, hey, I'm working on this particular course, for instance, then you might be able to send somebody a link where it had the / and the ID for that. I've also done this with not IDs because those can get kind of very long and not something that you certainly don't want to memorize or even type out. So you can actually set up your route params to work on really anything, including slugs. And so I've attached, or I'm part of the data model, I've had a slug. So this is kind of a friendly, hyphenated, kind of representation of the item that we're talking about or referencing, so that you could do, for instance, like /courses / Angular -13 fundamentals, and then you can actually look it up that way. And so just however you want to implement this logic, that is entirely up to you, but the idea that you could, if you're in a specific state with a specific item selected, you can store that inside of the URL, and then you have the ability to navigate directly to that state. And so it's important to think about a URL or a route in a way it is serialized state for the application. And so when I go to the route params example and I click on Hello Angular, well, this route here, examples /params/1, is a representation of the state that this application is in. And so this, in a way, is representative, or you can think of it even in a little bit like a state machine, is that every route kind of represents a state, and then you're navigating from one state to another. So this is how you use params within an Angular project. I want to go back into the code just real quick and just for review the little bit of logic that we use to accomplish this. We have our route here, and we are subscribing to the param map, and within this we are pulling out the ID, and then if we have an ID, then we are setting the current lesson based on that.